Amy, let me tell you about a magical place that is so exactly designed to be enclosed space, year-round fun for the whole family that I bet you already know what I'm going to say before I even say the name. Let's say it together on 3. 1, 2, 3. Great Wolf Lodge. You got it, Amy.
My kids loved Great Wolf Lodge when we went. You probably already know that it has a huge indoor water park with a wave pool, lazy river, a bunch of massive water slides. But then your pack can hit the other attractions because, wait, there's more.
Great Wolf Lodge has adventure-packed attractions like Magi Quest, a live-action game kids can play throughout the lodge, plus the Northern Lights Arcade. Spent some quality time there, so your kid who loves the lazy river and your kid who loves fantasy games will both have a great time.
Great Wolf Lodge also offers great dining options and complimentary daily events like nightly dance parties, all under one roof. Unpack the car once and you're settled in to have fun. And with 22 lodges across the country, you're always a short drive away from adventure.
We've both had such great times at Great Wolf Lodge, so bring your pack together at a lodge near you. Learn more at greatwolf.com and strengthen the pack. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fresh Take from the What Fresh Hell podcast. This is Margaret.
And this is Amy, and today we're talking to Dr. Christine Koh. You may know Christine as the co-host of the Edit Your Life podcast. Christine is a music and brain scientist turned multimedia creative. She was awarded a fellowship from the National Institutes of Health to fund her doctorate research, and she did her postdoctoral fellowships at places like Harvard and MIT. She's pretty smart. Christine creates content to help people live better, happier, and with elevated purpose and intention. She's the founder of Boston Mamas. She's the co-author of Minimalist Parenting. Christine lives in the Boston area with her husband, Jonathan, and daughters, Laurel and Violet. Welcome, Christine.
Hi, Christine.
Hi, ladies. How are you? I am so delighted to chat with you. I mean, we're going to get heavy, but it's going to be good.
When we were thinking about having Christine on the podcast, we sort of were narrowing down, like, what should we talk about? And we came up with this concept of building a family after adverse childhood experiences. This is something that we've had a lot of people reach out to us on our Facebook group, facebook.com/whatfreshhellcast. And this idea of how do we build a family if we have not come from a family that modeled the kind of family that we're trying to build. And so Christine Koh has written about this subject and lived about this subject, and she's going to talk to us about it today.
Christine, tell us a little bit about your own story.
Yeah. Well, let me just say first that I am so amazed and happy. I don't know if that's the right word, but I am happy that the conversations are happening in your community. I mean, I think it's something so many people are wrestling with. And, you know, I'll say personally that, so I grew up in the Boston area, family of immigrants, one of 7 kids, not a lot of money. It was very stressful. And there were a lot of other things going on, a lot of chaos. And yeah, it was really, really hard. And, you know, my siblings and I just slogged through it. But it wasn't until 2 years ago at age 45, which is crazy to me, that I actually learned that there was a name for what I experienced, you know, adverse childhood experiences. I was working on a project in partnership with the CDC, Injury Center, and the American Academy of Pediatrics. And I remember sitting in this briefing meeting, learning about ACEs and just being like, oh, there's research about this. You know, formally speaking, you know, there are different types of adversities that have been quantified. Things like, you know, physical, sexual, or emotional abuse, domestic violence, living in a home with mental illness or substance abuse, incarceration of a household member. And through this work, I realized that I had experienced 5 out of 7 of these adversities. And I was like, that's not good.
I learned this term from you. I hadn't heard it before, but it was kind of one of those ding moments of like, oh, right, that's a quantifiable, that's a thing we can name. It's adverse childhood experiences. And someone has put together a list.
I have the list here. It's from the CDC, put together the list of what the adverse childhood experiences are. There's 10 questions on a questionnaire that you can take. And I'll put the link in the show notes. So if this speaks to you at all, you can get the questionnaire and take it. But the types of experiences that the CDC says are categorized in this are emotional or physical neglect, verbal humiliation, growing up with a mentally ill or addicted family member, Incarceration isn't on this list, but I think it is, more generally, because the last category is parental abandonment through divorce, through loss, and I suppose through incarceration, just an absence of a parent.
Yeah, that is one of the little tricky things about ACEs is that depending on your source material, some of the numbers are how it's quantified is a little bit different. But, in a nutshell, it breaks down to really stressful stuff during childhood. And a lot of people suffer that. And many people like me, don't even know that it has a name. So I was actually and even so that was a little mind boggling to discover that so late in life. It also left me with this question that was, answered during this briefing session I was in outside of Chicago, that there are ways to turn that ship around. And, a lot of people, when they hear about sort of how I grew up and what my circumstances were, they're sort of like, how did you manage to be such a functioning human being? Ultimately, it boils down to the fact that, the technical lingo for it is SSNRs, which is, that's very researchy. It basically boils down to safe, stable, nurturing environments. Like people all the time, whether it's sex ed or whatever else, talk about the importance of trusted adults. And that's what it really boils down to.
You're saying for you in your life, it boiled down to you may have had a chaotic home life, but you were able to find safe, nurturing adults outside of that environment.
Yeah, but here's the thing, and I can send you the link that, which is the post that I think you read and are referencing. But what I realized through this process is one, there were all these people, throughout, secondary education and then also college, who stepped in to support me, and I wasn't asking for help. I was not an ask for help person. I have never been an ask for help person. They just noticed and they supported. And even when I was not doing that great, metrics wise, I have an English teacher from high school who, this is the other thing people don't believe because of all my degrees now, but I was a terrible student in middle and high school, solid C's, sometimes D's, except in music. And
were you struggling or indifferent?
I think it was just there was so much chaos and I think part of it was, brain development. I just wasn't the way things were presented in high school just did not compute for me. And I remember thinking, I wish I could understand this. But then I also was dealing with a lot of chaos and there wasn't a lot of space for, learning and growth. And it wasn't until I left home and went to college where I sort of had the space to sort of be my own person, sort of get out from the stressors, those stressors, and really thrive. I mean, that's what happened. But, so anyway, I had this high school teacher who, even though I was, struggling my way through to just get a C in humanities or whatever, this woman, Lucy Myers, I write about her in my post, she was like, you are a smart person. It kind of makes me teary just thinking about her. She was also the advisor for the student paper and I worked on the student paper. And so she was always supportive. And to this day, we are in touch, which is crazy, right? We still exchange holiday letters. Back in the days of seeing people, we would get together for lunch once a year. So it was the people who stepped in like that and a ton of music educators, I got to say, and, said, there is something, you have value. That just goes a long way for kids.
So they perceived you as needing the support, which you clearly did. Do you think at that age you perceived yourself as needing support? Were you thinking, oh, thank God somebody's throwing me this life raft? Or were you sort of like, why do they always want to talk to me after school? I don't understand. I'm just a kid doing my kid thing.
No, I don't think I perceived needing support because that was just what life was. I didn't know anything different. I never accessed school support services. I never would have thought to. And I mean, I do remember a social worker from, my childhood coming, over at one point, and that just, to me, I just thought, oh, that's just happening. It didn't even occur to me. So, and it wasn't these teachers, these music educators, I was just seeing them in sort of everyday life. They weren't sort of doing anything crazy or going out of bounds or making more contact than normal. But I think they saw something, they just supported me sort of along the way through regular contact. And it just, it's crazy. The simple act of being seen, how important that is for a kid. And also to be told, if you're really self-critical of yourself, as I was at that time, just because I hung out with smart kids, but I wasn't as smart as them or wasn't making the grades on paper, to tell them that's not the only thing that establishes your value, that was really important.
And I think it's interesting that probably, I think this is true. Let me know if you agree that even people who had very chaotic childhoods, hopefully people can look to that framework of safe, nurturing adult that hopefully most kids had somewhere in their lives that provided that safe, nurturing adult. And does that become your building block for moving forward as you start to think about becoming an adult? Like, what role do you look back and see those safe, nurturing adults having had in your development?
I think that they gave me access to, and of course I didn't have the words for this back then. I didn't have the words for it till 2 years ago, right?
Right.
But I think the key is that these safe, stable, nurturing relationships, they help you cope with what's called toxic stress. And the toxic stress is really like, I remember learning about it from a pediatrician at AAP. And, he was saying there's kind of like, you have kids who have a really stable childhood and then kids who don't. And then there's this sort of like, for a while, there was this sort of black box in the middle about like what helps determine whether a kid like me, thrives or tanks. And it is, you need something to cope with that toxic stress. And for me in particular, the real stress lever and the thing to cope with that was sort of joy through being reasonably successful at music and, having something I was actually good at. Like I definitely wasn't good at school, but I was good at music. So I think that's why, not surprisingly, all these music educators were such a big part of that story because, they were supporting me all, along the way and encouraging me. And so I think that was the big thing. So, whatever environment it is, you just need somebody and something to focus on that actually, it sounds in our current, sort of condo language of, finding something that brings you joy, like literally you actually need something that brings you that sense of fulfillment and joy in order to kind of cope with that stress. And that's huge. If you have a kid who can find that and you're an adult and you can help a kid tap into that, that's the gold right there.
Even probably for parents who, have a more functional household, that's still for kids who are stressed on any level, finding that outlet that brings them joy is super useful.
It's huge. Yeah. And it's important to say it might not be the same as yours. It might not be something you understand. And like, that's okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That your child's joy might be different from your own, you're saying.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like my 9-year-old is super tech savvy and is into this game called Roblox. I don't know if your kids are into it, but Lord,
we're familiar.
Oh yes. Unfortunately, I know way too much about Roblox.
But creating little tutorial videos, that brings her joy, and I don't understand it, and I only dive into it enough to make sure all the online safety stuff is happening, but I won't get in the way of that because that is a survival thing through through what we're going through right now.
I want to dive back in a little bit more into the sort of science behind this ACEs concept, and we're going to do that right after we come back.
For some of us, tax season is one of the only times that we look at our finances fully, and once it's over, well, that was terrible, and it is completely understandable not to want to think about it for another whole year. But using Monarch and being intentional with your finances in an ongoing way helps you see where your money is going and how you can put your refund to best use.
We are here to tell you, simplify your finances with Monarch. Monarch is the all-in-one personal finance tool designed to make your life easier. It brings your entire financial life, budgeting, accounts and investments, net worth, and future planning together in one dashboard on your phone or laptop.
Feel aware and in control of your finances this tax season and get 50% off your Monarch subscription with code FRESH.
As you know, my husband and I are preparing to send, 3 kids off to college, and I cannot tell you how helpful Monarch has been in showing us our full financial picture, helping us to track our spending and reach important savings milestones. Our weekly meeting, Amy, it's now run by Monarch.
Love it. Achieve your financial goals for good with Monarch, the all-in-one tool that makes money management simple.
Use code FRESH at monarch.com for half off your first year. That's 50% off at monarch.com, code FRESH.
You know that thing where you get an amazing pair of shoes at a really great price and want to tell everyone about it? Yeah, so do we. Here at Designer Shoe Warehouse, we'll give you something to brag about, like the latest styles from brands you love, or the trends everyone's obsessing over, or shoes that make you feel like, well, you. So go ahead, show off a little. Find shoes that get you at prices that get your budget. Head to your DSW store or DSW.com today. DSW, let us surprise you.
You know, Christine, what's so amazing about this ACEs research, which has exploded in just the last couple of years, is that we're understanding that if you had an ACEs childhood, which means you had adverse childhood experiences, it can actually harm your brain as it's developing. And people who had ACEs childhoods are 390% more likely to have chronic pulmonary disease. They're 460% more likely to have depression, cancer, and other chronic conditions decades after the trauma, I guess because of the toxic stress.
Yeah. I mean, this is one of the things, this early adversity, this is really common. So I think that's really hard. However, the other thing is that, yes, there are biological implications to what's happening. I think that it's probably beyond the scope of what we can talk about and what I'm prepared to talk about. But, ACEs will change, the way your genes work and the way your brain forms and functions in a not good way, especially if, those ACEs are severe and long lasting and lead to that toxic stress we were talking about before the break. That sort of overactivation of a kid's stress response system, I mean, that just wears you down. It wears down the body. It wears down the brain over time.
Yeah.
I think it's important to say, we're not pointing this out to be like, hey, you had a horrible childhood. And guess what? Also, more chance of cancer. It's not to just say, hey, this is to say what people are realizing, and it's, I think, very useful knowledge, is that adverse childhood experiences, I think that, in our generation, my parents certainly were kind of taught, let's not whine about the past. Let's move on to who we're supposed to be. And what we're saying with this, what we're dialing into this research about is not yeah, it stinks to be you. It's that this is real. This had a real serious effect on your body and mind. And so now what? And so it's not about dwelling on oh, this is so terrible. And, I don't want anyone to leave with the feeling of oh, well, I guess everything's ruined. But it is the thing of let's really dig into what our childhoods were like, because it's going to affect our actual lives.
Absolutely. And that, I mean, the good news is, I know, we've been talking about really not great numbers, but the good news is that, early adversity, it's not destiny.
Yeah.
We were just talking earlier about how, if you can carve out those levers to, mitigate toxic stress, if you can find those trusted adults, that can turn stuff around. I mean, that is really, really important. So, I mean, that is the good thing. And I even think that, I mean, certainly I'm very pro therapy, obviously, but there are things that you can do, even, maybe you didn't have all of the sort of, when I look at this list of people who sort of stepped in gently, to support me without me asking, I feel sort of humbled and overwhelmed by that. That, what a gift. But if you didn't have that same level of support, I feel like there is certainly work that you can do as an adult to sort of try to, unwind some of that stuff and work on it even later in life. I really do believe that.
What does that look like? Is that therapy? Is that?
I mean, I think it's the similar, and I don't know how, the CDC and AAP would respond to this, but I really feel like those threads of what are important to us as kids are important to us as adults. I mean, think about all the conversations we're having right now about how important it is to lean into your relationships. I talk about this all the time, whether it's on Edit Your Life or elsewhere. How important it is to find things that you care about that make you feel good. That's basically, all of us right now are experiencing enormous amounts of stress due to this long pandemic that never seems to be ending, plus, national chaos. Leaning into the little things that can sort of take your mind to a different place, to give you a release from some of that stress, even briefly. I mean, so important just for everyday mental health. So I think that a lot of the threads are actually very similar.
Can I ask you, I loved this when I saw this on your Instagram recently. You talked about the difference between protective care and restorative care. This was a great concept for me.
I'm big into this right now.
So I'll give one example that Christine gave on Instagram, then I want you to talk a little bit about the difference. So protective care in relationships would be letting go of the toxic relationships in your life. But restorative care is actually focusing your energy on loving relationships, sort of chasing the joy.
Yeah.
So can you tell us about the difference and how we can do these things?
Yeah. Well, so I came up with this term this phrase because the shorter, more economical term is self-care, right? And people talk all the time about self-care.
Right.
And then sometimes people roll their eyes about it because they think it's all manis and massages, and we can't even do that right now. And
we're in the backlash to self-care phase of the self-care conversation. Yes.
For sure. But I think what I was really thinking about a lot when I shared that post was that, our care for ourselves, it really requires two things. And I hate to make, life seem harder, but the protective stuff is really, both things require intention and, thinking and action. But I feel like the protective stuff is working on, putting up some boundaries around yourself. Amy, you mentioned the toxic relationships, and that can be, it's hard to just say, okay, I'm going to let go of my toxic relationships. But, a more concrete way that could play out is, perhaps muting or unfollowing people that make you angry, or just, putting up a little bit of boundary, maybe not responding to or picking up the phone when a triggering person calls you, that kind of thing. So that work needs to happen. And I feel like it needs to happen in tandem with the restorative stuff, like the quick text to friends you love, the GIF thread, things like that. I feel like those two things kind of need to happen in concert for sort of your restoration and your betterment of yourself to really stick.
Let's talk a little bit about your own journey and this idea that we kind of started with of starting a family after having a childhood that involved adverse experiences. And I know the kind of feedback that we get are people having this feeling of, I feel like I'm out in the middle of nowhere. I don't know how to be a good parent because I see my friends and they say, oh, my mom would always say this, or, and Amy and I both came from those kind of childhoods, but in generations back in my family, there are people who did not come from those kind of childhoods. And some of them have successfully, built families. Some of them have struggled more. And I'd like to just know your thoughts on that. What are the differentials there? What are the techniques? What are the helpers there for people who find themselves like, I am building a house with zero blueprints?
Yeah. I think that, the very first step is to just try to give yourself a little grace and space. When you don't have a blueprint, it is really, you're probably relying mostly on a list of things that you don't want to do.
Right.
I remember when I became a parent, I was like, okay, number one thing, don't get angry. Don't get angry. Don't be upset. Don't cause chaos. And that has taken years of therapy for me to unwind and understand that anger isn't always bad. Getting angry, showing emotion, drawing attention to yourself, those are very dangerous things for me growing up. And so it basically emotionally stunted me as a human being. And now I'm the kind of adult who actually has a children's emotion chart in my office so I can point to my feelings and try to work on figuring out what I'm feeling. That's where we're at now.
I think that's interesting, though, that you're not afraid to say, I had a friend who had modeled a lot before college and basically was starving herself for several years to stay at 100 pounds and whatever her 5'10" frame, because that's what she needed to do to work. And she got to college and she had to go see the nutrition. She had forgotten how to eat food. And the nutritionist had to give her the picture of the plate that has the clock signs, and it's put some vegetables here, put a protein here. And she was laughing I'm basically a 2-year-old, with my food plate.
I know.
And it's whatever it takes. Sometimes you have to go way back to brass tacks.
You really do have to go way back. So, that was one thing I wanted to not do. And then the flip side of trying to build a blueprint based on the sort of negatives was also trying not to overcompensate, right? So I grew up, we were basically, 7 kids, not a lot of money. It was really hard. We never had, I don't think I had a stuffed animal until I was 5, and it was because I got my tonsils out. It was there just was not a lot to go around. And so I found actually that one of my biggest challenges when I became a parent was trying not to overcompensate and, push my own childhood desires on my kid. And, I should also say I was the kid who wanted to sign up for everything, but could sign up for nothing. So I remember trying to, put all these things in front of my older daughter, and she was like, no, I don't want it. And it was very confusing and sometimes angering for me. And I was kind of I didn't say this out loud, but what I was saying in my head was don't you understand? You're lucky. You should feel grateful for all these things. No, she shouldn't. She has no idea. So I think it's kind of two sides of the situation is, one, trying to figure out a more positive baseline and the kind of family that you want to build, and also understand that you may have a plan, but your kids are going to be very different people with very different interests. So, you have to allow for flexibility and letting people figure out, what their thing is too. It can't just all be about you, sadly.
Right. You can't be the football coach dad who's like, you will be quarterback because I didn't make the team.
Exactly. Yeah.
What about receiving love as an adult? We had Ned Hallowell on our show last week, who has written Driven from Distraction and all the books about ADHD. And he talks in this new book, ADHD 2.0, that he had an ACEs score of 8.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
So he's like, there's no way I should have grown up to be, have written 20 books and, happy marriage and 3 wonderful children. But I did it. And the way to do it is that you have to save your own life by learning to take in love rather than push it away.
Yeah.
And I thought that was beautifully said because, yes, if you are getting a message that you're not worthy of love or that protection means, hiding from intimacy, then how do you sort of recreate that as an adult?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it's probably, and I will say, so here's the funny thing is that my growing up, even though it was hard, there were still, at some big baseline level, I knew my parents loved me, or I kind of had that sense that was the framework of what should be happening. And certainly my mom was really the anchor through all of that storm. And it's probably not surprising that my first sort of serious relationship in life ended up being like this tremendously emotionally abusive 3-year, ridiculous circus. So I think as we are seeking, I think that it's kind of an ongoing process. I mean, I think that the ability to feel like you're worthy of love is also connected to your ability to feel like you can ask for things or that it's connected to so many things. So I think that it requires working on trust, which is also really hard. And it also requires you to really try to continue to nurture relationships I'm thinking friendships in this case, where you do feel that sort of unconditional trust and love. And, I've definitely broken some relationships in the past because I could not figure that out at that particular time in life. But that is one of the greatest gifts I feel right now. And I still sometimes have to remind myself, okay, it is okay to be my full, messy, broken self in front of this person. And those relationships are really, the gold that is getting me through right now.
I think that rebuilding factor is so interesting. We're going to talk more about that when we come right back.
My favorite skincare products actually feel more like self-care, like they're so nice to put on and they smell so good that I'm actually happy when I get to that part of my day. And I swear that is how I feel about Osea's anti-aging body balm.
Amy, you are usually the lotions and potions queen on this podcast, but I have to say, hard agree.
Osea's anti-aging body balm is a liquid silk body balm that combines the lasting hydration of a lotion with the firming power of a serum, leaving skin smoother and firmer.
This body balm is clinically tested and designed to deliver visible results you can see and feel.
So we've gotten to use this product for a couple of months now, and I swear I have really noticed firmer and smoother skin, like on the back of my hands. It's like getting a mini spa treatment from head to toe.
Get a spring-worthy glow with clean, clinically tested skincare from Osea. And right now, we have a special discount just for our listeners.
Get 10% off your first order site-wide with code FRESH at OseaMalibu.com.
That's 10% off your first order with code FRESH at OSEAMalibu.com. Amy, when I'm having a good hair day, it usually makes my whole day better. And that's why on every day, I'm taking Nutrafol.
Nutrafol is the #1 dermatologist-recommended hair growth supplement brand, and it's the #1 hair growth supplement brand personally used by dermatologists. Nutrafol's hair growth supplements are peer-reviewed, NSF certified for sport, and clinically tested.
Nutrafol offers multiple formulas for men and women tailored to different life stages and lifestyle factors, so you get support that's actually right for you. Adding Nutrafol to your daily routine is easy. Order online, no prescription needed, with automated deliveries and free shipping to keep you on track.
Let your hair be one less thing to worry about. See visibly thicker, stronger, faster-growing hair in 3 to 6 months with Nutrafol.
For a limited time, Nutrafol is offering our listeners $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping when you visit Nutrafol.com and enter promo code LAUGHING.
That's Nutrafol.com, spelled Nutrafol.com, promo code LAUGHING.
So Before the break, Christine, you were talking to us about, building new relationships. And I think and as always, when we have conversations with people about things, what strikes me overall is no matter how niche the thing we're talking about, no matter how far away it might feel from my life, any given issue, it resonates with everybody. Like everybody has this problem of trusting themselves to accept love. Everyone has this. So many moms have this problem of like allowing themselves to be vulnerable and ask for help. It's something that all of us can work on. Mm-hmm. And I think one of those things is like this idea of trusting relationships. And I think for a lot of people listening, rebuilding does look a lot like finding a new family sometimes. Mm-hmm. Even people with difficult childhoods are still sometimes in contact with their families, sometimes in contact with the healthier members of their families, whatever it may happen to be. But talk a little bit about like found families and building new networks. And also you talked a little bit before about cutting. Some of that involves boundaries with some people who maybe brought some trauma earlier in your life.
Yeah. I mean, it is really hard work. And, I will say that especially when you have a family as large as the immediate family that I grew up with, like it's probably statistically impossible for everybody to get along great. I have one brother with whom we are just 100% estranged. I haven't talked to him in years, and that really makes me sad. And I know that I have tried and tried again. So I think, one of the best lessons I learned from my therapist was that, anyone, can't control what other people do. We can only control how we react, how we navigate a situation. And the best we can do is try to show up in the best possible way there. So I think that's part of it, is figuring out, okay, is there something I can do in this relationship? What is the most satisfying thing that I can do to try to heal or move forward or whatever? But I think, in terms of relationship build, I don't know if you guys know Laura Tremaine or if you've talked to her, but I had a fascinating conversation with her on Edit Your Life, and she has a book coming out called Share Your Stuff. And, it was just such a fascinating conversation because I love the way she frames how important it is to open up in order to strengthen those relationships. And, I think for us, like, the three of us on this podcast right now, we think of sharing as a very public thing. But her point was really like, it doesn't have to be public. It can be just one-on-one, and that women really struggle to share, their selves with one another because we feel like we don't want to dump, or we don't want to be the drama friend, or whatever that narrative is.
Or we feel sometimes that what we're going to share is too ugly, like it's not right.
Yeah, if you're somebody who has experienced a lot of hardship, I certainly felt this like, should I not tell this to people because then they're going to think I'm like really damaged goods and run away. And in the instances where that happened, like you don't want those. Those aren't the people who are going to be on your team. The people who are going to be on your team are the people who are going to hear that and be like, wow, I'm sorry. That sucks. I love you. So, I mean, that's learning too. But so I think that we have to work as adults, on embracing a little vulnerability and exercising a little trust, knowing that, if somebody does reject you for sort of sharing and being vulnerable with them, that's telling. And then, you have to move on and try to trust in the next, relationship.
Does that include talking to your kids, keeping ages and stages in mind? I'm just curious. Does that include talking to your kids about your own history?
I think it does. Again, I'm glad you said ages and stages. It's very important. My kids do know. I actually have, because of what I have dealt with in life, it's been really important to me to not try to make everything rosy. It's been important for me to show them when I'm having a bad day and to be honest about it, because that's part of like the resilience building thing, right? Kids need to see you struggle with something. They need to see you come back up again. They need to see you angry, and then they need to see you work it out so they know that they shouldn't be afraid of anger. That was a huge part of the journey for me, because anger, as I mentioned, was really scary and you didn't show it, and it meant something bad was going to happen. So yes, I think that generally speaking, this whole modern parenting narrative of like, let's protect our kids from all the hard things is really like you're doing a disservice to your kids. They need to know that you can deal with tough stuff and come back from it and learn something from it.
And I think that idea, Amy and I both come from Irish Catholic families, and in broad strokes, the idea was like, we pack bad things away and stuff them in the back of the closet, never to be heard from again.
I'm familiar. Yes.
That is how we roll. And I think it is a balance, right? You don't want to unpack that bag and just dump it all over your kid's head. That's not fair to them. They're not, ages and stages, even older kids, they may not be ready for, all the information about your inner life. I mean, I definitely remember being pretty late into my 20s before I thought to myself, like, oh, my mother thinks about something other than me. I think your child's worldview is very child-centric, but finding that balance between being able to say, we are emotionally truthful, but we don't kind of unpack the bottom of the bags and throw it at each other.
Yeah, because, and I know this from my sex ed work too, is that, kids, they're going to tune you out too at some point. So I think it is really, just looking for those natural connection points. Like certainly wouldn't bring up my sort of emotionally abusive relationship with my 9-year-old because it's just not relevant. But with my teen, if she is navigating a new relationship, then yes, I would and the message, really the top line message would be and has been, you deserve to be treated well by whoever you're going to be in a relationship with. And I've said to both my girls, like, one of the things I really want for you guys is to just find someone who loves you and cares about you and thinks about you like as lovingly as your dad does for me. Like, so there are just like general, really not stressful messages, top line messages that really just dial back to value and, valuing yourself as a human and knowing that you deserve good things. Like, those are just really basic things that are important to communicate to our kids.
And I think there's a foundational piece of the ACEs study that is that taking the ACEs kind of survey and that it makes it okay to talk about what happens. Mm-hmm. The founder says, right, it removes the power that secrecy so often has to just own what happened to you.
Yeah. I mean, that was the big thing so when I wrote that post, I felt very passionate about it, but like how it is on the internet, you write something or you produce something and you're not sure how it's going to land. And I was shocked by the response to that post and all of the, both private and public messages of people sort of learning that either there was a connection to their lives that they hadn't understood, realizing that it was time for them to step up as an adult and, try to look for those natural intersections where they could be a trusted adult or keep their eyes out for somebody in their neighborhood or whatever. I mean, that's like, what you dream of, or what I dream of is just finding a way to communicate a message that will help people sort of open their awareness and their hearts a little bit. So yeah, I think shame is such a driver for so many things. And this is not a topic to be shameful about. When you are a kid, experiencing things at the hands of other people, there are other cast members, involved. And so it's not something you should shoulder all by yourself.
I want to end on sort of a note of hope because you have built this incredibly successful life. You have a wonderful spouse, wonderful children, just tons of success. You rebooted your own life. And I just want the person listening who might be at an earlier point in her journey to feel like that is possible. Can you tell us just a little bit about how you made this happen for yourself?
Wow, that's a big question. But
sorry.
I think that, part of it was really, gosh, I hadn't really thought of it until this moment. So thanks, Amy. But I think maybe that's part of why I left academia. I remember being on the precipice of like the big dream that I had. I literally had just, finished my very fancy postdoc. I was looking into faculty jobs and I was like, I'm good at this, but this is not bringing me joy or filling me up on a daily basis. And so, leaving the field so that I could create things on my own terms and be in charge. I am a little bit bossy, and autonomous. That was really important to me to have creativity and autonomy at my fingertips. And so
maybe
that was my okay, let's, really lean into the joy and the things that I really care about and get excited about, as a way to sort of navigate life. And then I think the other thing has really been, and this is my, rally cry to everybody right now, like whether or not you have experienced ACEs, is to really identify that support squad, both for the moments, where you're happy and also the moments you feel like you're going to lose it. And that would be like all of us right now. I think parent stress is just such a huge factor when it comes to ACEs. Certainly that's where I find the grace in thinking about my growing up and what my parents were dealing with as, immigrants in this country, constantly, being targeted racially, all manner of things, like this is the time that you have to build your trusting relationships and your network in order to get through what we're going through right now.
Awesome. We like bossy ladies on this podcast, so perfect. We like to head towards the phrase, solved it on our podcast, but I don't think we're going to solve this one, Christine. But you definitely gave us lots of great insights, and I want everyone to come check you out wherever you are, just to revel in, we could do really 45 minutes on like Christine's amazing life, but tell us where to find you and where people can check you out.
I guess the easiest place to find me and all the projects I do is at christineco.com. And I find that like people really, really want to chat with me on Instagram for some reason. I don't know what it is about that platform, but I'm Dr. Christine Co there.
Awesome. Thanks so much for this conversation.
I'm going to put a link to the ACEs questionnaire in the show notes for this episode, as well as a terrific article from Psychology Today that talks about the ways to recover from an ACEs childhood, and of course a link to Christine Co. Thanks for talking to us today, Christine.
This was awesome. Thanks, Christine.
Thanks. This was such a pleasure.
This is a Monday.com ad. The same Monday.com designed for every team. The same Monday.com with built-in AI, scaling your work from day one. The same Monday.com with an easy and intuitive setup. Go to Monday.com and try it for free.